Welcome back, or welcome to the Rebel Tech Podcast, where we discuss the promises and perils of emerging technology and the social, political, and policy landscape in Texas. I'm Zach Whiting, Policy Director and Senior Fellow of Technology Policy at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. We're in the middle of a series exploring the top legislative priorities for TPPF in the 2025 legislative session. And today, we're going to discuss data privacy. Now, this is my colleague, David Dunmoyer, Campaign Director for our Better Tech for Tomorrow initiative. And David, I know this is an issue that's near and dear to your heart. You've spearheaded our excellent research and engagement on this issue. So let's start with that. When did you first start working on the issue, and why did it grab your attention?
Yeah, well, before I answer that, I want to say introduction was perfect. I'm going to have to refer to you as the Honorable Zach Whiting, since you're omitting that in your title. But thanks, Zach.
Yes.
And, you know, I think you set it up perfectly, because this is something, when we talked about in episode 0, how we got into tech policy, data privacy for me, it's kind of the origin story. It's my Spider-Man gets bit by the spider, where it all began. And my background before coming to TBPF and before getting my master's in public policy and going that avenue was actually in digital marketing. And so I was on the bad side, so to speak. And one of the jobs that I had when I was at TCU was at a digital marketing firm, and I had Best Buy and Facebook as a client. Mm-hmm. And so I got to see firsthand, kind of working on, I did more like the community moderation. So it was making sure there wasn't truly incendiary content or comments, but then part of my work started shifting into the data side. And I had read about and I had seen what was happening in the data collection space, but witnessing it firsthand and being somebody who was a part of that system, which we'll talk about, cognitive dissonance doesn't accurately describe it. It was discussed at how unwitting we often find our participation in this social experiment, where social media companies are just accruing unthinkable amounts of data, and the level of granularity and specificity. And so I saw that firsthand, and that was back in 2015. And from there, Cambridge Analytica happened. And I remember I had a media law class, and I focused my final project on Cambridge Analytica and what was happening in the new and emerging, well, I guess at that point it was pretty set in stone, but the social media landscape as it related to elections and democracy. And I'll never forget, in our book, we were studying the first time social media had been used in elections, and was talking about a young and suave Barack Obama, who with great effect used social media, and that was in 2008. And that shift to 2016, where you saw that they call them the hyper-persuadables in these precincts, where there are maybe 13 votes. If they could get a change there, it could have dramatic impacts on elections. And being exposed to what was happening at Facebook at that time, and doing this project kind of in concert with the congressional hearings, everything that was happening. And I remember thinking very vividly, you had this huge unrest, and you had people, Elon Musk back in 2016 said, get off Facebook. And you saw a disconnect with folks who were outraged, but still felt like, man, I feel like social media is good for my brand, and like for what we do, we use it for education and awareness. Mm-hmm. And so while there was this complete disgust with what was happening, there was a sense that, well, look, this is here, this is the modern town square. And so it was 2016 for me when I started realizing we need champions who are fighting for consumers. And if folks are going to continue using these services, we need not say, hey, Facebook, now Meta, we're capitulating, take all of our information, and because the service is so great and so grand, I don't care what you do.
And it's free.
And it's free, right. As a consequence, we're, of course, the product. So roundabout way of saying, those were some of my the things that really shaped my perspective on data privacy. And I went on to work in public affairs, and I didn't have any direct clients that were in that space, but I did digital marketing again. And I remember all the targeted ads we were doing and the robust data profiles we were working with. I won't name names, but there were certain companies that we worked with who were able to get the precise information on chairs of committees. So what we would do, and I say this almost like I have to take a shower after it, is you can find out, all right, this committee chair has these people in their network, go to the church that they're at, they have this family over for dinner, and we can target those people to organically have conversations with that committee chair to say, hey, this bill to protect consumers from social media, you really shouldn't vote in support of it, you shouldn't hear it. And so seeing and experiencing that firsthand was really my seismic shift of, okay, at the Texas Public Policy Foundation, we talk about how each of us that are here, we have a gift. I happen to believe it's a God-given gift for all of us, that we're passionate, we're intelligent and driven, and we work incredibly hard. And so I'm like, I really feel like there's a calling for me to use these skills and this experience I have to be on the fight for positive change. And so then, I moved to Texas, go to grad school at UT, and one thing I was fighting for at TBPF was to get a tech policy initiative, and data privacy, I knew that was the first issue I really wanted to jump into.
Yeah, well, thanks for fighting for that, because I have a job for it now, so appreciate it. So you set the table really well, and we have gotten to a point where states like Texas and even other states, and dare I say it, the U.S. Congress, are working on data privacy from a public policy angle. So why is Texas, let's focus on Texas, but why is Texas, why is Congress talking about this now?
Yeah. Well, we can speak, we both can speak very fluently to why Texas, and then I'll touch on Congress. Texas has been fighting for data privacy reforms for 7 years, at least 7 years. And there was that title shift I kind of talked about that happened around 2016, 2017, which matches with the timeline of when we've had bills introduced. And the why behind it is very simple. Over 90% of Texans for quite some time have recognized, hey, I should be in the driver's seat when it comes to my personal information. This isn't a political partisan issue. This isn't hey, big business is bad. This isn't capitalism is bad. This is a fundamental prerequisite understanding that to be a free and liberty-oriented society, privacy is a prerequisite.
Yes.
And that's something that, again, it transcends political bounds. And so in Texas, we can point to specific stories. There's during hearings, we heard about Amy Boyer, and this is a story that happened before I was even in junior high, where data brokers were able to obtain hyper-specific information on Amy Boyer and sold it to a person that was stalking her. And the stalker used this to find out the route she took to work every day, where she parked her car, and ultimately the stalker showed up and murdered her. Yeah. And so that, again, this is almost 20 years ago this is happening. And we can point to story after story after story. And one thing we were talking about this morning for the podcast is that there's something about the relatability of this issue too. Because even if, for folks watching, if you don't have social media, I commend you for that. But you've heard somebody who has either an experience where there's a tailored ad where they know their phone is listening, or maybe they're getting emails and targeted advertisements that are very specific to things they were searching. It's palpable. We're all feeling the effects of data collection on modern society. And the last thing I'd say, kind of why it's been percolating in Texas for quite some time. We talk about the story of Target. Yeah. And for folks listening, if you haven't heard this story, I remember, this must have been 15 years ago, I heard this story for the first time. And the short of it is, there's a woman who is a frequent shopper at Target, and, as the systems work when you have these memberships where you get points in exchange for things you buy, well, it's collecting information on what her normal purchasing pattern is. So this woman had been shopping for things for a child that was to be expected in about 6 months, building out the room and getting all the supplies and everything ready. And she hadn't notified her parents yet. So her parents are getting all these coupons and advertisements sent to their house for diapers, for formula, for pacifiers. And the dad ends up calling Target like, hey, this is inappropriate, suggestive, and so on and so forth. And the daughter ends up hearing that her father does this. And Dad, I am pregnant. Yeah. And so the notion that Target knew before her own parents knew that she was pregnant. Now, should she have told her parents? That's a different story. The point is, this is years and years ago. This is a brick and mortar store. Yeah. What happens on social media is 15, 30, 50x that. Yeah. So it's the relatability. It's the fact that it affects everyone. And ultimately, because it isn't a political issue, it's one where As we testified and we did a lot of the coalition building on it, we are working with very center-left organizations, groups that historically the foundation hasn't found partnership on, because whether it's AARP say, hey, look, our member base doesn't know how to navigate some of the concerns of data collection and how to have proper cyber hygiene, or it's Texas Appleseed, an organization that's done great work on protecting victims such as Amy Boyer from stalkers or sexual assault. We found just tremendous coalition building alignment because everyone has a different reason to want to have control over their personal information.
Yeah, and I think the point you made is well taken. This is not just necessarily doxing celebrities. This isn't the at Elon Jet account following his jet all across the country and the world. It is yes, there are celebrities that this stuff has happened to, but there are there's federal judges, and then there's domestic violence victims where people have showed up. They try to get off the grid, they try to get away from their abuser, and they show up at a shelter like that and kill people in that shelter, and it's just disgusting. I think you kind of headed in this direction, but how you've talked about the data collection practices, but how did we sort of get here? Was this always the model? Was Target always a data collection entity, or did they just used to sell T-shirts and crackers for charcuterie boards?
Yeah, well, when I was a kid, they're the place with the best ices. That's what I thought. But no, it's a great question, and when I'm talking to folks about this, I tend to focus on Facebook as kind of the case study behind this. And the quick background, as I know you know, Zach, but for our listeners, Facebook started in the dorm of Mark Zuckerberg, and it was initially actually a service to rate the attractiveness of women. So to say that there was virtue and morality animating his impetus in social media, I think that jury is settled. But it grows into what becomes a connection service, a social network for college students. Seems fine enough, right? Finding a way to have kind of a digital messaging board for folks at Harvard, and then it grew out the Ivy League and eventually all major universities. Well, then as things meteorically took off and they found, hey, there's great utility in connecting people online. And I could see it honestly and say, the early days of Facebook, when it was intended, before you have the like button and you have all these highly competent, sophisticated engineers who are working on emulating the serotonin dopamine effects you get from slot machines with all the different widgets and tools on Facebook, it really started as a tool after the whole vanity thing to connect people online. Well, then that starts shifting around 2008. And as I know we'll talk about in a future podcast episode, 2008, for those in the tech policy realm, is when everything starts to change.
Yes.
Data privacy, kids' safety, surveillance, and so on. For the data privacy space, it was Zuckerberg's brilliance, quite frankly, in bringing Sheryl Sandberg onto their team. So for folks who don't know, Sheryl Sandberg, author of Lean In, former COO of Facebook, she left at some point last year over disagreements on the direction Meta's heading into. But she was brought on to try to find a way to monetize Facebook. And it started off with more innocuous advertisements. And if you played any of those Farmville games or games they have on Facebook, it was just finding different vectors to serve ads so that Facebook could get payment. Well, Sheryl found out, hey, we have some of the most robust personal information. We're talking demographics, geography, this new term called psychographics, which Facebook largely spearheaded. And psychographics is your political proclivity, what messages you're inclined to respond to, what things might set you off. And all this data based on how your pupils dilate when you see things. You get more excited, your pupils dilate. You get more triggered, your pupils dilate. Or how swiftly your eyes are moving on the screen because they know you're reading with rapt attention. I mean, I could keep going on, but it's that level of granularity.
Yes.
And so Sheryl realizes, hey, this is the single best profile of information that advertisers are looking for. So we can come to an advertiser and say, hey, we know Zach Whiting loves Formula One, and he's going to watch the race this weekend. And all these other, we know exactly what your favorite driver is, which car, which kit you like and don't like. And full disclosure, Zach is a huge Formula One fan. So Facebook knows it. Now our audience knows it. But the point is, we can now tailor and target ads specific to you. Yeah. But it goes further than that. That's where it started. And it created this massive market where personal information became the new gold. Data is the new oil, so to speak.
Yes.
And then you get into this camp of, well, we can sell it to advertisers, but we can also, in our terms of service, we say, well, we're not going to sell your information directly to third parties. But if it happens to be out there, and if it happens that we're going to package this data and de-identify, that's the buzzword that all the tech companies use. And basically, it's just all the information. Let's say it's on me. I'll target myself this time. We're going to strip David Dunmoyer, but we're going to have his address, his IP. We know if he's using a VPN. We know what phone he's using to check in. We know where he's using his phone to check in. We know everything about his I could go on and on and on. And so you sell this to a data broker. Well, data broker, 99.99999% of the time there's de-identified data, they re-identify it with a quick Google search, or not even that, just their algorithms and AI can figure it out. And so now data brokers, who are these third-party shadowy figures that have no name, no recognition, they can operate in China, in Russia, North Korea, it doesn't matter. They now have these robust data profiles, digital dossiers we call them, on individuals. And so Facebook finds another way to profit, which is a whole new marketplace for nefarious sellers. We're going to sell it to the highest bidder. And some of these data broker companies, when I was doing research last session, I kid you not, they were braggadocious about the fact that, oh, we have profiles on military members. We know how many are at what different base, or we know how many are deployed overseas. We know their favorite MRE. We know all this stuff. And they're selling it to, you get China, Russia, and so on. So all that to say, it wasn't always that case, but Facebook really set off this whole fixation on the amount of money as a social media company we can make. We're going to transform our business model from connecting people to monetizing our users. And yeah, and the rest is, I wouldn't say history because we did something about it in Texas, but that is effectively the default model for a lot of social media companies now.
Yeah, and so now you have this tension where it's like, okay, so what? Like if I go look up Formula One stuff and they want to try to sell me a Red Bull shirt, great, I'll buy it. And
Sure.
They want to sell me a Ferrari shirt, I'll say heck no because I don't like Ferrari. I don't have that much animus towards
Sure.
Ferrari, but so what? So people say that's fine. Just do it. Why did the state, why are legislatures getting involved in this? And we talked about Texas being a leader on this. I imagine you'll talk about the bill,
Sure.
HB4, but that is a signal that leadership in the legislature prioritized consumer data privacy to give it a bill number HB4. So what did Texas do last session, and what are the benefits to consumers for those efforts?
Yeah. Well, the reality is, I mean, we work at a think tank, and we have the blessing to roll up our sleeves, spend time in the thick of it, talking to folks who work in tech, talking to folks who work in the Capitol, talking to folks who've been studying this, and then ultimately publishing a very comprehensive research paper outlining everything that is happening in the data collection economy. So the problem with that is that there's so many information asymmetries, there's so much opacity. And so everything I'm breaking down now, that wasn't necessarily conventional knowledge. I think folks, who are hearing this are like, yeah, no, that makes sense. It resonates. But Chairman Giovanni Capriglione, he's a good friend of the foundation, and he's known as the tech guy in the House. And he's been working on data privacy bills for, 6-7 years now. Yeah. And so everything that I kind of laid out is what he would say too, as to why privacy is a prerequisite to freedom. And his fight on this issue was in recognition that most Texans just don't know how bad it is. Yeah. And just as we do, he would tell stories about constituents who would come to him and say there's cyber stalking incidents, or there's issues with sexual assault and violence because the data allows these criminals to be even more effective. Mm-hmm. So his bill, we call it a digital bill of rights. And this is House Bill 4. It's the Texas Data Privacy and Security Act. And up front, it is the strongest consumer data privacy law in the nation, period, the end. And it is a culmination of, as I said, years of work of Giovanni Capriglione. We played a tremendous role, too, in the research, advocacy, coalition building, testimony, getting out across the state and talking to anyone who had listened to us about this issue. And there was a shift, and this happens politically, and I know you as a former lawmaker understand this. It is a little bit of luck, but there's also just an incredible amount of effort that goes on behind the scenes. And so Chairman Giovanni Capriglione, before last session, before the 88th legislature, had a stakeholder group he assembled. And we were active participants in this. And the idea was, let's get every tech company, let's get every lobbyist who's going to want to kill this bill, and let's get TPPF in the room who's going to want to support this bill until hell freeze is over, and let's hash out our differences. And so spent an incredible amount of time during the interim working on that, during session promoting this bill. And now I'll get to the actual punchline. What's this bill? So House Bill 4. Because we don't know what's being collected, the digital rights that are included changes the entire system. It flips the script. So Texans, as of July of this year, July of 2024, will have the right to know what information is being collected. So you can know, hey, XYZ companies know your Formula One team, the fact that you're not too enthused about Ferrari, and so on and so forth. And you can see in a very visible, accessible way, here are the kinds of information and the specific information companies have on you. Cool. Mm-hmm. We now have transparency. And transparency, that which can be measured can be fixed. So that's the starting point. Well, the bill goes on. We have the right to know. We have the right to correct inaccurate information. And there are certain instances where people might want to have a birth date that's corrected or an address so they can be in a specific zip code area if they want tailored ads or tailored services. So the right to correct inaccurate information, the right to delete information. And that includes everything from basic personal information to sensitive information, which is your precise geolocation, your ethnicity, your religious status, and so on and so forth. And then the big one is the right to opt out from data collection. And what this means is that it'll go into effect, as I said, July of this year. When you go onto a website, there has to be a very visible, a conspicuous, as they call it, link or tool to allow you to exercise all those digital rights. So if I go on to ESPN.com, and there will be a link that's very clear at the top, exercise your House Bill 4 rights. And so I can go on and I can request to have that information deleted, to opt out. And that is the first step for putting Texans back in the driver's seat. And I know one thing that we fought tooth and nail for was the right to not be discriminated against, too, because there's a concern, rightfully, that, well, these companies are these massive Leviathan organizations. If I'm exercising my rights, are they going to discriminate? And so it's now the law of the land. These companies can't throttle your service or weaken the service because you want to have a more privacy-centric option. And there's so many more components of the bill, but I think, as I said earlier, it's a flipping of the script where now we have a sense of control and agency. And ultimately, the goal is to continue we're talking about all of our, LEAs for next session.
Yes. We're
going to continue the work on this, right? And part of what we're aiming for is a universality of opting out or even an opt-in.
Yes.
The notion that, how backwards, Zach, that these companies, I keep ragging on Meta, but let's take Meta again. They, in their terms of service, say, oh, it's your personal information. It's your geolocation.
You own it.
You own it. Yeah, you are not the product, despite what literally everything else that we do indicates.
Yes.
And we have to come begging hat in hand for them to honor their responsibility to not collect our personal information. And so the goal to work toward is that companies as a default can't collect information unless I say, yep, nope, that's totally fine. I want the tailored services, or I want what I believe to be benefits associated with you collecting my information. And I'll say this, we get some pushback from some of our free market libertarian friends, and I've had so many conversations with folks in that space where this is reasonable common sense policy, because we now understand what the trade-offs are when we have the right to know as a baseline. If I know you're collecting all this information on me, and I'm also aware of what the benefits are of said information collection, I can make an informed decision.
Yes.
And so it puts us in the driver's seat and empowers Texans, which kind of animates a lot of the policy that we work on, Better Tech for Tomorrow.
Yeah, and I would be remiss to say, as you talk about that 6-year stakeholder process that went on, and you have 200 stakeholders in a room, and most years you have 199 that show up to say, Representative, thank you for your efforts on this. This, we appreciate what you're doing, and here's why your bill sucks, right? And so you have that for 6 years. And as a former lawmaker, that can be hard, especially on these high-profile bills, to keep taking those punches. But we had legislators, we had folks like Representative Capriglione who endured.
Yes.
And then you go into the stakeholder meeting last year, and I think everybody was like, well, what happened? You have 200 stakeholders in the room who are like, this is a good bill, this is a good direction, and I think that is a testament to the work that lawmakers put in. But and I joke, sort of pejoratively about lobbyists. I mean, it's their job, and I'll say this: I worked with so many great lobbyists, and there's a lot of great folks out there. There really are. But it is a testament to the work that he's done. We're going to wrap up. Our last question here is, and you alluded to it, the opt-in, the universality, or of opt-out. Is there anything else next session that we need to do? Device, data privacy, any other things that we should be looking out for next session?
Yeah. Well, this feels like jarring and against my, my self-respect. But I brought what I think is my passion, my pride and joy from the work that we did last session, which is Governor Abbott's pen he used to sign House Bill 4 into law. Yeah. And one of the things, and why I have this, and I have it next to my desk to remind me every day the work that we're doing, and the recognition that it's one thing to get recognition from folks who are, in the movement, politicians, our governor, and so on. But for the Texans who are now realizing there are groups that are fighting for us. And so to your question, what are we doing next session? I talked about the universality of opting out as a goal, or even opting in so we have even more control. We'll talk about this in future episodes, but with the really catalyzed onset of self-driving vehicles, how digitized, there are computers on wheels, our cars now. And the amount of information that car companies are collecting on us, and they're selling that to insurance companies to determine if you're a high-risk driver, and so we're going to increase your premiums because you drive at these certain times of the day. Yep. That's one area where we can certainly tackle some great reforms for Texans. And I'm realizing literally putting Texans in the driver's seat on that one too. But then there's just broader device-level data privacy. Roombas and smart devices in our homes, there are horror stories of companies and third parties that collect the videos. And if you didn't know, if you own a Roomba, it's recording everything in your house. And Amazon now owns Roomba, and they did that intentionally so they can see, this rug you have has a stain on it. Maybe we're going to serve you some ads for a rug that you might be not looking for, but might be interested in, or young girls who have been recorded by Roombas while in the restroom. Yeah. And so every smart device in a home, how can we, again, give more agency and control to Texans? And that Senator Hughes worked on that last session. Yes. We were very optimistic to partner with him again next session. And then data brokers, there's more we can do in Texas to ensure. Senator Johnson passed a great bill, Senate Bill 2105, which creates a registry for who, as I said, these shadowy figures, we now know who they are because they are now required to report with the Secretary of State. And we want to make it so that Texans can completely opt out of these, what could be foreign national interests and adversaries who are using data brokers to collect our information. We want to be able to opt out from that root and stem. And so those are some examples. And then with AI, we'll talk about that.
We'll talk about that, yeah.
Yeah, but there's so many. Look, I'll conclude by saying this. I've said 3 times, I think, that privacy is a prerequisite to freedom. And we get a lot of questions, well, this House Bill 4, it seems like a great law, and you guys are a model state, and now Congress is acting on this because they're feeling the heat. But is this going to be sufficient to keep up with emerging technologies? And the point is, it is the start that we need. Because without that transparency, without that control on the part of consumers, all other subsequent technology can run roughshod, move fast, and break things without any insight into how they're operating. Yes. So definitely more work next session, but it's encouraging that we have so many great leaders in the state of Texas, between the governor, lieutenant governor, a speaker, and great champions in both chambers who see this as if not one of the most important tech policy issues that will determine kind of the conservative movement. Certainly an important one to get us headed in the right direction.
Yeah, and frankly, as bipartisan as any issue that we've seen in a very long time. Well, David, thanks for your insight on that, and look forward to we'll talk about all those things. We'll talk about the data privacy implications in autonomous vehicles, artificial intelligence, and more. So in future episodes as well, we're going to dive into policy ideas that lawmakers should consider. We talked about those today. We'll talk about them in other issues. That is all for this week's episode. I want to thank you for joining us. We'll see you again soon for another exciting episode of the Rebel Tech Podcast.